All right. So you want to write a novel. Congratulations. And I commend you for that. I, like you, was in that same place not too long ago when I decided that I wanted to write a book and I wanted to put all my free time into writing and just follow that passion. So, hello, I'm Joanny Ortega, otherwise known as Joa, and I have an MFA in creative writing from National University. And I also have written several short stories that span from age ranges of adult to middle grade in the genres of thriller to realistic fiction. And currently, I'm working on a horror adult novel as well as a YA fantasy. So, I wanted to share with you the things that were hard to me to comprehend as I was immersing myself into this world. Because let's face it, it's a brand new world, the literary world. It has its own language, it has its own norms and traditions and things of that nature, right? And let me give you a bit of an anecdote that happened to me while immersing myself into this world. So I immersed myself by listening and following other writers that were successful in their craft. And I tended to focus on indie writers because I knew that I wanted to do that. I wanted to embark in the indie publishing journey just because of the time that I have as well as the control that I like to have. So, because of that, I have known for quite a long time that that was a journey that I wanted to take. So, because of that, right, when you know what you want to be, you want to surround yourself with others like that. And that's what I did. And in a conversation that we were having, we started talking about the genres that we like to read. And me, an avid YA reader, said, yes, I like to read ya. And it was this awkward pause, like so awkward, so awkward. And then finally, somebody took me out of my misery and was like, you mean YA? I was like, yeah, yeah, YA. Yeah, that's what I meant. So while I was an avid reader and have been an avid reader for quite some time since I was a child, I didn't know the lingo of that particular age genre, right? And there's a lot of other things that I didn't know. So that's what I'm here to do, to hopefully keep you from moments like that if I can, right? If not, hey, go for it like I did and laugh about it later on, right? But I like to make things better for other people so that way, hopefully, they don't have to go through the same heartache and embarrassment that I did as I was trying to um, come up and integrate myself into this world, I should say. So I wanted to start some videos where I go over things that I learned in the MFA Creative Writing Program, as well as the things that I have learned while immersing myself into the literary world and into the world of indie publishing. So I want to have videos of things from what is a POV all the way to beta readers and book blurbs and eventually Ingram Spark and oh, my horror stories, I gotta tell you. Oh God. And I want to share that with you so that way, if you embarked on this journey or you're thinking about it, then you don't have as many missteps as I did. So, welcome. This is my very first video, and I can't wait to have you here for all the other ones I'll be making. So, in today's video, we are going to be talking about POVs. POVs, you say. This literary world, they love acronyms here, right? You heard me say YA, YA for young adult, and there's also NA for new adult, MG for middle grade, but that's another lesson that we will be talking about later on. Today we're going to be talking about another acronym called POV, which is point of view. Hold on, because I got my notes here. So, POV refers to the perspective from which a story is told, right? So POV is who is telling the story, and in what manner is the writer presenting the story to the reader. So it's an essential element of storytelling that can significantly impact how your readers experience your story. So I have a good anecdote of this. So one of the things that I've noted from reading YA, like I said before, I love YA. That's one of my favorite, not genres, because that's not a genre, but age group to read in. YA fantasy is one of them. YA speculative fiction and YA magic YA, all the supernatural YA. I love that. So when I was reading YA, and even when I started to read middle grade, what I noted was that the POV that is often used in those kind of books is first person POV. First person POV is when somebody says I, me. So the author is telling the story through that character's lens. So essentially, I call it almost as if the writer is an actor, right? Because the writer is pretending to be that character. And everything that they're talking about, they're discussing in there is through that character. So we often see I, me, and we're talking about the main character. And I asked why, because one of my classes that I took was a YA. Let me see. Yeah, and I got this book, YA literature, because I took a class on YA specifically because I love to read that, but also I was writing that at that time as well. And like I said, eventually I'm going to write a YA fantasy. So look out for that. And I asked the professor, why is that? She basically said, remember how you felt when you were that young. Go back to that time. How did you felt? What were the things that were going through your head? How deeply did you feel certain things? Did you think like it was just you against the world? Did you think like people just had it out for you, like everything was just happening to you? And when we started to think about that, we was like, yeah, the world was pretty rough as we was growing up, right? We had like very little autonomy. We depended a lot on adults around us for certain things, for decisions, for things like coming and going to places. So because of that, it felt very me, me, me kind of thing. So naturally, a story that is told from the perspective of a young person, it will be more natural. It will read more authentic when it is written in first person POV. So first person POV, you will often see it in the younger age group when you're reading those kind of stories. And it's a combination of first person past and first person present. For example, Mrs. Franchi's Evil Ring and the 6 Months That Changed Everything, that's the new middle grade novel that I just published. I did that in first person present. And I did that because I wanted the reader to be in that moment. I didn't want them to think about a past event because I felt that Isla, the 9-year-old main character that I had in there, wouldn't have had the introspection necessary for that to be believable, for me to make that POV pass. I wanted to live in the moment, and I wanted Isla to learn from the lessons happening then. So that way, when in turn I have a young reader that is close or similar to the age that Isla is in the book, then they also get to learn in that moment with Isla. So I had a particular reason for why I did that. And let me explain why I'm telling you this. Another thing that I learned from the writing program was that when an author makes choices in their story, it needs to be a reason there. That's one, right? So, and usually that reason should be what works for the story and what works for the characters. And two, when the author makes that decision on that story, it should also be something that is in line with the norms of the literary world. with the norms of that genre, with the norms of that age group. So usually when we're talking about young people, when we're reading stories about young people, it's in first person POV. So it will be a little weird, a little unfamiliar to read something that is, let's say, a middle grade story from a third person POV. And I have a great anecdote for this. So I was reading, and I'll put the book on the show notes, but I was reading a book, and it was a middle grade book, and it was a great middle grade book. And it had disability representation, it had other diversity representation. It was awesome. The story was touching, but it was something missing in there. And I remember talking about it with somebody else who read that book, and I was like, something was missing. And we kept going back and forth. And then it dawned on me. I was like, this book was written in third person POV. And it was a middle grade book. I was like, that's too much distance for me when I'm reading a book that, for a younger audience. Are you ready? Let's start with the younger ones. So we have The Babysitter's Coven by Kate Williams. So I'm going to read you something, then I'm going to give you a pause, and then you tell me if it's first person, second person, or third person, and then we can go past present as well if you want. Okay, once again, this is from The Babysitter's Coven by Kate Williams, and this is a YA novel. All right, let's see. Chapter 1. The devil was an artist. Her medium varied from crayons to magic markers to finger paints, and she had coloring books, construction paper, giant pads of newsprint on a tiny plastic easel. But today she ignored it all in favor of the hallway and a marker. Previously pristine white, the wall was now permanently adorned with black squiggles, dots, shapes, and lines, all drawn at eye level. Well, her eye level. A little less than 3 feet off the ground. How did I know this art was permanent and not the water-soluble kind? Because baby Satan, known by some as Caitlin, was still holding the Sharpie in her hand. Let's get to that. I love this book, by the way. But let's go to a dialogue in case you haven't noticed what it may be a little confusing. In case you haven't noticed what the POV is. So let's hit the first line of dialogue here, and that is on the second page. Give me that, I said, grabbing it from her, 2 years old and already into graffiti and huffing. So if you haven't recognized it yet, but I'm going to repeat it again. The dialogue is, give me that, I said. So what POV is it? If you said first person and if you said first person past, you are correct. As you see, or as you heard, I should say, it said I said. Okay, so I. So whenever we hear I, or me, it is first person. And it used said as opposed to says or say, then is first POV past from a YA. Okay, let's do another young person's book for lack of better lingo. Next in the chute. This is another good one. I like the first one in the duology, but the second one was good. Blood Like Fate by Liselle Sambury. Y'all ready? All right. Okay, I even put from my library, my own personal library. All right. Chapter 1. The cloying scent of vapor smoke in the lounge is as suffocating and sweet as the memories of my grandma. The last time I came to Chinatown to sell products to Rowan Huang, Granny was with me. She was alive, and I was a very different girl. Now I sit on one of the plush red love seats waiting for the Huang matriarch to grace us with her presence. The velvet of the fabric invites you to sink into it, but I keep my back straight and lean forward. Lounging into the furniture just makes me look smaller, even more like a little kid than I already do. I fight not to grit my teeth. I'm so hacking tired of being reminded that I am a child. Beside me, Keisha has no problem snuggling into the crimson cushions. She pulled her knees up to her chest, bulky coat pulling around her neck, scrolling through her phone while I searched the room for Rowan. I almost got lost in that one. Okay, let's go. First dialogue. She knows we don't have all day, right? Keisha whines, snapping me out of my thoughts. Today, my cousin is wearing a honey brown sew-in wig that seems as long as my body is tall. I swallow. I'm sure she does. Can you tell? You should have been able to tell from the narration here, because it's not as confusing as the last one. The last one, we had a reflection of that started with she and her, because the main character was looking at the person that she was babysitting, and that could have maybe confused somebody into thinking that that was their person. But then when you read the dialogue tag, then you're like, that's first person past. And here it's a little different, because right here we see in the narration, the last time I came to Chinatown, So this story is being narrated by the character herself, the main character herself, who is hecking tired. Right? And then we go to the dialogue tag, and then it says right here, I swallow. I'm sure she does. Swallow. In present tense. So what would this one be? If you say first POV present, you are correct. This is a YA. Isn't she cute? All right. Another one. All right. This one, folks, is middle grade. So this is Maya and the Return of the Godlings. This is middle grade. All right. Let's see. Is middle grade going to be a little different than YA? Chapter 1. Training to be a guardian was hard. Harder than when I forgot to do my math homework for a week straight and Mrs. Vanderbilt dropped the pop quiz. Harder than when I had to dust the house from top to bottom and clean the basement. Even harder than corn dog day in the school cafeteria when I had to pick off the mushy cornbread. Ew. Sweat streaked down my forehead and stung my eyes as I stood in front of the tier in the Vale in the middle of Dali Plaza. It was 6 o'clock in the morning on the first day back to school, and I hadn't even brushed my teeth yet. I had startled awake 30 minutes ago when my version of Spidey senses kicked in. Anytime a tear happened, there was a ripple in the fabric of space. If it was close enough, I could feel a tingling sensation across my forearms. Do you need help, Maya? Papa asked. His voice rang out clear as a bell in the plaza. It's okay to ask if you do. I've got this, I said through gritted teeth. I've got this, I said. So if you guessed first person past, you are correct. This is first person past. All right. So in the younger audience or younger character, younger story books, we had 2 YAs from my bookshelf and 1 middle grade. And we found to have all of them first person POV. 1 was present while the other ones were past. So as you can see, the first person POV past is, if you go off of this, is more popular. It's more normalized. So I guess I went a little bit out of the norm with my first person POV present when it came to my middle grade. So let's talk about third person POV. So third person POV as opposed to first person POV has he, she, or they're actually saying the character's name in there. So when I say third person POV has a bit of a distance between the reader and the story, is because when you're using those pronouns, it feels almost as if someone is telling us the story. And more specifically, when you use third person omniscient, that is what I call the godlike, a godlike voice that knows everything that is in the story, knows everything that every character in the story is feeling, is thinking, and inserts that into the book, right? And when you read something like that, it's almost as if a narration of sorts, like someone is narrating the story, as opposed to a first person POV when it's like I, me, and you're reading that. It's very easy to insert yourself into that character, and it's like you in that story. So that's why you may often hear and that, you know, first is a little closer while third is a further away. But it may be the authors may want that for their stories, to have that distance. And if you have noticed, that third person POV is often used in adult books. But yeah, so we have third person omniscient, which is the godlike voice. And then we have third person limited, which is godlike, but with a fault, as I like to say. So that just means that the author is writing from the point of view of a character, and that's all that they're talking about. That's it, not the other characters. In omniscient, the author is in every character's head, okay? But in limited, it's only one character that they're following, and that's all that you get as a reader. So an author may want to do that to have some mystery in their story. So if they want to keep some things a little hidden, or if they want to give it a little bit more suspense, they may want to use the third person limited, because then that means that all the reader gets to see is just what that character sees and what that character knows. So that scope may be limited. So then there may be some things that it's like, it may be the character says, oh, what is that red hat? Never mind, right? And they keep going throughout their story. And then the reader is like, wait a minute, that red hat may mean something. Go back over there. Go tell that other character over there about the red hat. Why don't you do that? But they can't, because everything is in that character's head. It's not omniscient. It's just with blinders on. So you see? So I go back to saying that when you choose your POVs, this is like one of the important decisions that an author makes when they're starting to write their story. Not only what is a story, well, you start with an outline or you start with an idea, but then you got to be like, how am I going to present this to the reader, right? You want this story to be digestible to the reader. So you have some choices to make. What POV will the story be best in? And can you compromise with that and the norms for that genre? Sometimes you can, sometimes you cannot. And hard choices will need to be made, author. Hard choices. Okay. That's all I'm going to say about that. All right. So now we're going to check out the adult one. I don't have that many, but let's see. Okay. So we have Octavia Butler, my favorite author, by the way. Celeste Nyong, Little Fires Everywhere. And Jill Santopolo, More Than Words. All right, so let's start with Octavia Butler. Oh, God. Oh. This has a lot of notes. So this was one of the books in one of my syllabus in class. So I had, was it 2 Octavia Butler books in my syllabus in this program? Yes, I did. I had Kindred and had another one, and then it got so good that I just started reading all of them. So I love this lady. And we will talk a little bit more about the MFA program and then the things that it taught me. So that way, if you want to kind of do something the same, just in your own, at your own pace, within your own structure, in your own environment, you can. One of the things that they taught us is how to read, take notes, so we can critique and find things that we like and things that we don't like, so that way we can try to approach our writing in the same way. Look at this. Look at all these. It was like notes everywhere. Okay, enough of that. Ooh. Notes everywhere. All right. Golly. I'm gonna have to get a clean copy. This was the class copy. I gotta get a good copy. All right. Nevertheless, chapter 1. The sun had not been up long enough to burn off the cold dampness of morning when Teray and Ire left their dormitory room at Red Hill School for the last time. Ire was all eagerness and apprehension, and her emotions were contagious. Teray had resigned himself to being caught up in them. The act of leaving the school together not only reinforced their status as adults, but made them husband and wife. Teray had waited 4 wearisome years for the chance to leave safely and begin working towards his dream of founding his own house. Now with Ire, he walked toward the main gate. There was no ceremony, not for their leaving school, nor for their marriage. Only 2 people paid any attention to their going. Teray sensed them both inside one of the dormitories, a patternist girl who had been Ire's friend and a middle-aged mute woman. They stood together at a dormitory window looking down at Ire. The friend kept her feelings to herself, but the mute radiated such a mixture of sadness and excitement that Teray knew she and Ire must have been close. So good, huh? All right. Let's go to the first dialogue. Teray transmitted surprise. There's been trouble then. Who was raided? Karansine, and vocalize. I'm spreading my perception as widely as I can, just in case the raiders are still in the area. Karansi? Said Teray obediently. So close inside the sector? You need to get this book. That's really good. So, on the narration, you can tell. Let's go back. He walked toward the main gate. There was no ceremony, not for their leaving school, nor for their marriage. There. So you see that pronoun there. He walked. Teray had resigned himself. So all of these are signs that this is in third person POV. And then you go and look further, and then you see that the verbs are in past tense. So this right here tells you that this is in third person POV. And once again, when you look at the dialogue tag as well, if you missed it in the narration before you get to the dialogue tag, then you can go to the dialogue tag, and you can see that right there it says, Karansi said Teray obediently. So said is in past tense, and then Teray. So said Teray, third person. Okay, and also you will see a mixture of he and she and they and them, which is another telltale sign that this is in third person POV. All right, going to Little Fires Everywhere. Let's see, what do we have here? Let's go. Should we go to chapter 2? Let's go to chapter 2. The previous June, when Mia and Pearl had moved into the little rental house on Winslow Road, neither Mrs. Richardson nor Mr. Richardson had given them much thought. They knew there was no Mr. Warren and that Mia was 36, according to the Michigan driver's license she had provided. They noticed that she wore no ring on her left hand, though she wore plenty of other rings. It's a lot of narration here. Okay, let's go. Okay, here it is. First dialogue that I see. Moody was the first of the Richardsons to venture to the little house on Winslow. He had heard his mother describing their new tenants to his father. She's some kind of artist, Mr. Richardson had said. When Mr. Richardson asked what kind, she answered jokingly, a struggling one. It's all right, she reassured her husband. She gave me a deposit right up front. That doesn't mean she'll pay rent, Mr. Richardson said. So, once again, said, past tense, and Mr. Richardson. So, we're naming characters here. Third person, POV. Mr. Richardson, he, she said. And then if you notice something, where is it? And we can talk about this in another video. When an author tries to put in here, so as you can see, this is in third person past tense, third POV past tense. But in here, somebody is recollecting something that happened before that. So the story is already in the past, but there's a note here that somebody was remembering something that was further than the period that we're talking about here. So when an author is already writing a story that is in past tense, and this is something that we can talk about a little bit more in another video when we're talking about the verbs in a story, when we talk about how an author does a recollection or a memory, how to identify that in the story. Because there's a way, that's something that I learned in the MFA program as well. So as you see here, one of the characters is recollecting or remembering something that happened before the timeline in this story. So that character used the past perfect because you see him saying he had remembered as opposed to he remembered. And that's the way of the author differentiating between the moment, the timeline that is depicted here, and a timeline that happened before the timeline that is depicted here. So it's almost like this story is in the past, and then when he uses the past perfect, he's depicting an even paster, an even older moment. Okay. And we can talk about that, how to do memories, how to do recollection, or how you may have seen this too when you're reading a story and somebody remembers something, or somebody like goes back in time in their mind and then they snap out of it, right? So that's a way that you can represent it. We will do one last one, okay? More than words. So let's go quickly through this one. Oh, this is great. Oh, this is awesome dialogue here. I was a mess when my father was sick, Raphael said. I'm impressed with how well you've kept it together these past few months. Nina knew his father had died of congestive heart failure 5 years before. She knew his whole biography, but she'd imagined him handling that heartbreak with the same pragmatism he seemed to have used to get over his divorce. In the months she'd known him, Raphael had been all facts and passion about how he could make the city better. But emotions, those had been locked away, kept secret, or maybe just saved for people outside the office. I hate being a mess, she told him. This is another awesome book. I love reading these because it just makes me remember why I love them and why I kept them in my library. And I kept them because I love them. So as you can see, or if you may have guessed it from all this talk about POV, is that this is in third person past. So what do we have? We have 3 adult books, all written in third person past. So what does that tell you from that small random experiment with just small numbers? that when it comes to stories that are geared towards adults, that age range, they're most likely going to be in third person past. Does that mean that they cannot be in others? No, not at all. If the story that you're writing, if the best way to present that to the reader, remember, because we are writing for someone to read, unless you're keeping the story to yourself and you're not never publishing, then I take that back. That story is just for you. But if you're writing with the intent of showing it to an audience and publishing it in whatever manner that is, then you're writing for a reader. And this shows right here that the reader has gotten accustomed to reading adult stories in third person POV, most likely third person past. So you may want to accommodate that, and it'll be great if your story it can be presented in that manner, because then it's a win-win. It's a win-win for the story, and it's a win-win for the reader. And if not, if something differs in there, then that is something that the author will need to reconcile. I will tell you a story. So I told you I started to write a YA when I first started writing, and it was a YA fantasy that required a lot of world building, and that was supposed to be my thesis for my MFA. That was what I would present to my thesis professor, and my thesis professor would have gone over it, would have said yay or nay after they read pen it all, and then that's what would have gotten my diploma. But my skills at that time were not there. I started with a third person POV on this YA fantasy, and I realized like halfway through the story that it was not working. It was just not working. It was too much space between the main character, this teenager witch, that can insert herself into other people's head, and it was just this fantastical thing, right? And then I needed to world build and all of that, and it was not grasping me, and it was not grasping the people that were reading it. And somebody pointed out, why are you writing in third person POV? And then I didn't think anything of it. I kept writing, and then it was like, try a sentence or two in first person. A little cabeza dura, stubborn, right? So I was like, no, I like it in third person POV. I want it in third person POV. But they were right. So I did that. I went not just a sentence, but I wrote the first chapter in first person POV. And when I tell you that story was like, it gripped me. It gripped me. And you're going to know as an author too, when you read your own story out loud to yourself, and you're going to be like, ooh, I wrote that. Oh, okay, that's good. And that's how I felt when I read it back out loud to myself. I was like, oh my goodness, Abigail is a badass. And it was like that. And then that's how I knew that the story that I was crafting needed that first person, not the third person. Let me tell you something there, writer. It was hard to do. It's not impossible, but it was hard to do. And I don't wish that on anybody. To have to change a POV after you have written almost an entire manuscript. Ugh, Dios mío. Ojalá que no. Ojalá que no. I wish that doesn't happen to anybody. So, if you don't want that to happen to yourself, I highly suggest, I encourage you, if you're not sure of how your story is gonna read best in what POV, try that out. Okay, so maybe do your first chapter in first, and then do another one in third, and then just see and talk to other people. We're gonna talk about feedbacks in another episode. Don't talk to your families and friends that love you. when you're getting feedback. They're going to tell you everything is great, and they should. And if they don't, I don't know what to tell you. Pick somebody else. No, I'm joking. I know. Sometimes you can't do that, right? The family is the family. But they're supposed to do that. They love you, so they always gonna say, "Yeah, that's great. I love it. I'll buy your book," and stuff like that. So go to somebody that will be kind and candid. I'm gonna use this often. Casey, find the KC people in your life or around you to give you that feedback. Go find KC people so that way they can be honest and kind to you and give you the feedback that you need. Okay? And if you have people that read that genre, let's say you're like me and you're starting with a YA fantasy, then go find somebody that loves to read YA fantasy and be like, "Hey, how does this sound to you?" You know, don't ask for grammatical or anything like that. You're not there yet. Just ask that simple question. How does this sound to you? And they'll be like, I'm not feeling it. That's a sign. That's a sign. If somebody's not feeling it, you want, especially that first chapter, you want to go like this, to the reader, right? And that first sentence, you got to go, ugh. Remember, readers' attention spans are very short right now, so you want to go, okay? So if you're not going at the beginning, you're going to have to change it. And that's okay. Because writing is rewriting. We also have the second person POV, which is not as popular. It's just when you say you got in the car, you went to get groceries, you. So that's no longer in vogue right now. It's not used as often. I have read 2 books like that. And just to give you a quick anecdote when it comes to that, it was jarring at first to read it. But then once my brain got used to seeing those pronouns, that POV, then kind of like it immersed me in the story because it was like the writer was talking to me. That's how it felt. Now, I think for indie authors, right, we can get away with some things because, you know, we're like those rebel writers, out of the lines, drawing outside the lines. So maybe you may want to try a story. I always say if you want to experiment, go with a novella, go with a short story and experiment. Or if you have the cojones, go with a whole manuscript, then go with a whole novel and experiment that way with second POV. What do you have to lose? But gain experience. You're gaining something. But yeah, just keep in mind that that's not very popular and you may not get that many readers, but you will get an amazing experience. And just kudos to say, I did it. I wrote a second POV novel. Okay, but that's it. So we have first, third, and the least famous, second. So that is all we're going to talk about today. And I leave you with that to think about. And once again, my name is Joanny Ortega, otherwise known as Joa, and I am here to go with you over all the things that I learned while going through my MFA in creative writing with National University, as well as while going to writer conferences and just immersing myself into the writing world and indie publishing world. I hope you join me once again on another video. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Adios.